This is the second time we've talked about something called the octopus as a metaphor for our organizations. Today, we will explore that metaphor as a way to help us build a super intelligent organization. Stick around to learn what that is and how you can use AI to transform your business into a super intelligent business. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders like you and organizations like yours make a bigger difference, becoming the leaders and organizations you were meant to be. If you are listening to this podcast, you could join us in the future live to get this information sooner so you could apply it more quickly on your favorite social media platforms. You can find out where and when and how and all about those live episodes by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, just two of the platforms where these are live streamed. First, just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to get all of the details. If you like what you are hearing today and want help in developing the leaders in your organization, let's talk. Reach out to us at info@kevineikenberry.com, and we'll schedule time to learn more about your needs and share how we might help. And having said that, let me bring in our guest and introduce him, and we'll dive in. His name is Steve Wunker. He is the Managing Director of New Markets Advisors, a global consulting firm that helps ambitious innovators, including 29 of the Fortune 500 companies, find their next wave of growth. He's founded 4 companies, developed one of the world's first smartphones, and worked with AI initiatives for over a dozen years. A longtime collaborator with Harvard Business School legend Clayton Christensen. He's considered one of the world's leading authorities on innovation. He's written over 100 articles for the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and others, authored 4 best-selling books. His newest book he's co-authored is called AI and the Octopus Organization, Building the Super Intelligent Firm. Steve, welcome. Glad you're here. We are going to dive in, and we're going to probably be a little shorter than some episodes because Steve's got a client. So we're going to dive in. We're going to talk about this, get going on this. So Steve, why this book? Why now? Why this book?
You know, there's so much written about AI, Kevin, and yet there's almost nothing about how management and organizations have to change to get the most out of AI. It's like we're writing about electricity as a technology, but we're not saying, hey, this can create an assembly line. This can create a totally new basis of competition. So yeah, technology is great, but we need to broaden the lens and think about the system of work. That's where the real potential for change lies.
Okay, octopus organization. Like why this metaphor? It is the metaphor of the book. And I said it's the second episode we've had. We had someone else on recently. I got both of your books within like a week of each other. So make sure we understand why that's the metaphor that you're using here.
You bet. So the concept of octopus organization was originated by my co-author, Jonathan Brill, who's the futurist at Amazon, about 4 years ago. And he used it mainly as a metaphor for adaptability. But as he and I were talking about this book, we realized as we just delved into understanding octopuses, among many other things, they've got a weird biology. They have 9 brains, 1 central brain, and then a brain in each of the arms. 2/3 of the brain tissue in an octopus is actually not in its head. And that led us to realize, as we delved into it a little bit more, that octopuses are a great analogy for distributed intelligence. Each arm can sense and think and act independently, while also being totally aware of what else is going on in its organization, if you will, what all the other arms are doing. And that allows the central brain to focus on what's actually really important and strategic, like how to escape that shark that's coming at me. So if we can be like octopuses, not only are we very adaptable, but we're able to undertake things in massively parallel fashion, act and react very quickly, close to the front line, and do it with awareness about everything else that's happening in the organization. These are all things that AI enables.
So you just used the phrase distributed intelligence, and I think if people were listening, they already see the correlations for themselves. But the book isn't about distributed intelligence; it's about what you're calling a super intelligent organization. So we should probably define that before we go any further. What do you mean by that? What is that? What should that look like to us?
So superintelligence refers to being smarter than humans. But that does not mean that we just turn over the keys to the machines and let them do the work. That's a big fallacy in the popular press about AI. It's going to be better than humans, and so humans just turn it over, and who knows what we all do. We get great at our golf games. No, it doesn't work that way. The intelligence in an organization actually arises from collaboration. If you just measure numbers of neurons, an anthill is going to win that contest. The reason that humans can build civilizations is that we collaborate, we build on each other. And so AI can actually be the catalyst for doing that. It enables the right information to go to the right people at the right time. It connects people from across an organization, and then it turbocharges some of the things that they want to do, oftentimes doing things that humans shouldn't be doing or won't be doing because they don't have the time, and sometimes doing things that humans can't do as well. All of that together becomes what is really super intelligent, an organization that simply could not exist before AI.
So I told you this before we went live, that one of the things I love about the book is that you start, like, everything for everyone who's listening, everything we've said so far is about looking ahead. And yet, Steve, you started by looking back. And I think that context is very helpful for us. So and again, we're not talking about writing a prompt. We're not talking about an LLM and that sort of thing right here. We're talking about AI in a bigger context. So I'd like you to help us put this coming transformation in a historical context. I know you can, because you wrote about it. Help us put this, because I think this will help people a lot. I really do think it will.
So, Kevin, as you mentioned, I worked with Clay Christensen for many years, and he's most known for concepts like disruptive innovation and jobs to be done. But if you really delve into his works, you see where they came from, which was that he was a student of business history. He was a big proponent of understanding the patterns in business history to distill what then that means for what happens in the future. In our case, we look at several historical examples, but let's take, for instance, electrification, which is probably the closest parallel to the dissemination of AI in terms of just totally remaking an economy. The winners in electrification were not the factories that replaced their steam-powered machines with electric machines. I mean, that was nice, and it was certainly more productive and more reliable, so it should be done. But the real winners were people like Henry Ford, who could fundamentally rethink the system of production and create innovations like the assembly line. The assembly line could not have existed without electricity, but it wasn't just an electrical innovation. It was rethinking the whole system of work. So we need to be like Ford and rethink that whole system of work to get the true benefits out of AI.
The other thing that you talk about is the railroads. And you talked about how, and the thing that I think is so interesting about that is that railroads helped us create a way of working that has really in some ways been in existence all the way up until now. And you're suggesting that we can't live that way anymore. The octopus helps us think about that, but we can't live that way if we're going to go further. You want to say anything more about that?
The first org chart that was ever created was in 1855 by the New York and Erie Railway. And it described a very classic top-down organization. It's telling that on some of those early railways, the telegraphs worked in one direction only. It says a lot about what people needed to or wanted to know. And so we've had these top-down organizations with these cones of work. And sometimes we've created innovations on that, like matrices, but fundamentally it's still top down. AI enables us to really rethink how work is done. So the real way work actually happens in organizations doesn't accord to the org chart. It's not in these top-down cone-shaped hierarchies. It's across, it's in horizontals, whether it's within some function or across functions. That's how people actually get stuff done, not through just relaying things up and down the telegraph in railroad sort of fashion. With AI, we can toss aside the org chart and think about what Microsoft calls work charts. We can disaggregate the work into its unit components that are needed to create outputs, and then really rethink from first principles. How would you do this in an AI first way? Where is AI exclusively going to do the work? Where is it a cyborg of human plus AI? And where are humans only doing this? And then how does AI create the connective tissue between those humans so that the right information comes to the right people at the right time? Now, sure, they'll still have reporting lines, but the real work is done in those horizontals. AI makes that possible. So we need to, steam railway is long past. We need to toss aside the organizational models of 170 years ago and update that with what AI now enables us to do.
And let's be clear. I think this gets lost too. And you talk about it in the book, but this gets lost too. Like that approach to managing the business made sense in the context, to a large degree, in the context of what the work needed to be. Our work context is totally different today, right? So all of what we're talking today, I really love this idea of we have to rebuild from first principles rather than bolting on AI, right? So how should we be thinking about AI? Because you say in the book it's not a tool, or it's not only a tool. So how should we be fundamentally thinking about it as the starting point to help us do the things you're suggesting?
So actually, Kevin, I think we start not even thinking about AI, but thinking about the core business priorities that you have. AI is the answer to a question. It's not the answer in itself, or it's not the question in itself, right? So first, business priorities. Second, how do you achieve those priorities with work that today humans shouldn't do, won't do, or can't do? Doctors in consultations with patients shouldn't be spending half their time looking at a screen and typing in a keyboard. We won't take notes after every meeting that we have and distribute them to all the participants. We can't, as I did this last week, have a workshop with 120 participants where people break out into groups of 4. We have 30 different tables, and all of them take notes via a voice recorder rather than on a flip chart in super summarized fashion, a voice recorder that we can then get transcriptions of and summarize detailed conversations from 30 different tables and the commitments that people undertake. You just couldn't do that before AI. So should, won't, can't. If you think about that, then you start really unleashing what the organization might do with AI.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I highlighted in the book. I love those 3 pieces. You've already answered this question in a way, but I think but I want to ask it directly, right? Like, what do you see organizations getting wrong as they're implementing AI? Like, again, you've already tossed a bunch of crumbs here, but get very specific. Like, what are the big mistakes you see organizations making?
The biggest one, Kevin, is that they think of AI as some sort of grease in the machine, or some sort of dust that they put on top of all their existing strategies and ways of working that is going to magically transform things. And it won't. You might get some minor efficiency improvements, along, by the way, with some hidden costs. But looking at it that way doesn't really change your competitive position. It doesn't change your cost structure. Your speed of action doesn't fundamentally alter the basis of who you are. You need to back up and think about it, as I said, from the first principles. So yeah, by all means, do some little experiments, do the productivity enhancements. That's great. But if you're not really backing up and thinking about it hard, you're missing a trick. We talk about it in another publication, Kevin, in terms of ABC. A is AIify the present. So yeah, by all means, if you want to put in a natural language interface on some like internal intranet, yeah, sure, by all means, go ahead, do that. B is become great at experimentation. The bigger the enterprise, typically the worse they are at experimentation. But given that we're in this world where the technology is advancing so quickly and what people are doing with it is changing so fast, you need to be really good at experimentation. So you need to know, what are your hypotheses? What are you trying to learn? What are your pre and post measurements? How are you going to capture those learnings? How are you going to disseminate them? How are you going to kill experiments? So often people don't do that. C is create the future, which we've been talking about.
I wrote just last week. So for those who are in the podcast, it will be a couple months ago. But I just wrote last week about how so often when we're facing uncertainty, what we do is we fight, flight, or freeze. And I'm suggesting what we need to do is test, try, and learn, which is exactly, Steve, what you're suggesting. Because in a world context that is more uncertain than ever, we need to think about how we can use these things to help us deal with that, rather than try to bolt it on to something that reminds us of what we used to do. I think it's a really important piece. One of the things that's happening a lot in our world right now is that organizations continue to get flatter, and we continue to question the role of middle managers. I think one of the most important things you do in this book, and one of the things I think that organizations really need to think about is, hey, the role of middle manager isn't going to go away. It's going to change a lot, or needs to change a lot. Talk about that change. This may be the most important thing for everyone listening. This may be the most important thing you hear.
Kevin, I actually agree. I think it is probably one of the most important things, even though it's back into chapter 2. I agree with you. There are so many wrong-headed assumptions out there in the popular press about AI, and this is a huge one. People say AI is the death of middle managers. No. AI is a revolution in middle management. No longer do middle managers have to spend time looking at Excel reports, summarizing what people did, attending meetings to hear what else everybody else is doing, socializing concepts, all things that are not really a good use of the skills that middle managers have. So they shouldn't be processing information. AI does that very well. They need to be close to customers. They need to be closer with their direct reports, not spending a one-time one-on-one every week, maybe. But really,
maybe that's maybe
right. They need to be joining with them, coaching them, understanding what's happening at the coalface of the organization, focusing on the strategic issues, and critically, every middle manager needs to become a change manager. Something that a CTO relayed to me recently. She'd been thinking about she has a very large organization, over 1,000 people. And she said, I've got so many people here who I've hired for their technical capabilities, but I've realized anybody who has direct reports in this organization needs now to become a change manager. It's so true. It's no longer the high priesthood of change management in the C-suite.
I would actually argue that she should be saying change leader or change champion, but the point is absolutely accurate, right? The point is absolutely accurate. There are a ton of books that talk about culture. We've had a number of the best ones on this show. The word culture is not on the title of this book. The culture chapter is perhaps the shortest chapter in this book. And yet, it's, in some ways, everything we've talked about is culture. The thing that you bring to the table that I want you to talk about is you're not writing a book, and in this book, you're not talking about culture change writ large. You're talking about something very specific, how we as a culture deal with technology. So our technology culture. So can you talk about what you mean by that and what we should be thinking about? That's like taking culture down to that one thing, right? Like what does that look like to you?
So Two things about culture. First of all, culture often lags, it doesn't lead. You need to address the hard variables of change first, how people are assessed, how they're hired, how they're incentivized, how they're promoted, how you allocate resources. If you don't change that, you're very unlikely to change the culture. But the culture is really important. It guides all those invisible decisions and behaviors that senior management is never going to be able to dictate, nor should it dictate. So one critical element of tech-oriented culture change is having an acceptance of perhaps not failure, but of learning, and even an anticipation that people are going to learn. And sometimes that is going to be through mistakes, but it should always be in the service of learning. We're moving into a very uncertain time if we're not there already. There's a tremendous unclarity.
I think we're already there. I think we can officially say we're already there, Steve.
Trying to stay in safe ground here, Kevin, but yes, I agree. So look, none of us have this figured out. Jonathan, my co-author, is one of the world's leading futurists. He will tell you it is a total folly to go predict what the world is going to be like in 10 years. But we can talk about the patterns of change, and we can talk about the skills that you're going to need to adapt given those patterns. So a huge one is that ability to experiment, to learn, to disseminate those learnings, and have a degree of psychological safety so that you can act in a way that's a little more free than you might have anticipated. We quote a study in the book by some landscape architects who looked at how kids play on playgrounds. And the first playground they had was a very traditional playground with big swing set and slide in the middle and things scattered around the edge, no fence. And the kids clustered around the big equipment at the center of the playground. And then, okay, kids go away. Only thing they changed was they built a fence around the playground. And then they brought a different group of kids and they saw how did these kids play in the playground. And the kids were playing all over the playground, right up to the border of the fence. And the lesson of that is that we always have invisible fences in our minds. If we don't lay out where that fence is, we tend to constrict ourselves to the center of the playground. Actually, by laying out the fence, by setting the boundaries and the governance guardrails, you actually create freedom. So we need to create the freedom to experiment within the fence.
That is a powerful piece of the book and a powerful study, and it ties to empowerment, it ties to accountability, it ties to psychological safety, it ties to setting clear expectations, it ties to so many of the things that everything on that list I just described are some of the things that leaders ask me about, talk about every single day, and so I love that. We have a limited amount of time because you have some place that you need to be. So I have a couple of questions I want to ask as we shift gears before we finish. One is, I want to know, Steve, what you're reading these days.
So I actually read an article just this morning by Sangeet Chaudhary, who's at UCal Berkeley. It's a new piece in Harvard Business Review. And it's titled, Why New Technologies Don't Transform Incumbents. Sangeet has a book called Reshuffle, which it came out at the same time ours did. It's very consistent and yet very complementary. We do not say the same things, but they are very much agreeing with a common thrust. So he looks at how companies like Adobe and fashion houses just layered on new technologies onto existing work practices, didn't fundamentally change them. And then you had companies like Figma and Shein really rethink that way things were done and disrupt what actually were pretty forward-thinking incumbents, but not flexible enough.
Well, there's that word flexible, everybody. And that's the title of my last book, Flexible Leadership, which I have been not saying anything about, but it's all so connected to this. Although, again, I barely even use the word, the phrase AI in that book, but absolutely dead on. Before we go, where do you want to point people? They want to learn more, Steve, about the work, about the company. Where do you want to point people before we say goodbye?
So the book, AI and the Octopus Organization, is on Amazon. You can check out the website, aiandtheoctopus.com. please connect with me on LinkedIn, Steve Wunker. And I do respond to email, so do get in touch, and I'd love to hear how you're approaching these sorts of issues.
Listen, I have a question for all of you. It's a question I ask you every week before I say goodbye to Steve and say goodbye to you. And the question is, now what? What are you going to do? Like, there's no point to this. I mean, Steve and I are fun, relatively good looking, but what matters here is what you're going to do. I said relatively, Steve. What you're going to do as a result. If you don't take some action here, what's the point? There is no point. Like, we are in an age of uncertainty. We have new opportunities and tools all around us, but we have to step back before we can step forward, and we have to think not about bolting things on, but recreating what we've got. And so all of that is like some of the kinds of things we talked about today, but the real challenge is, what are you going to do? That's the challenge for you. I hope you will take that challenge. Your other challenge is to make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any future episodes. You can come back again next week. Steve, thanks so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
I enjoyed it.
We'll be back next week, everybody, with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you then.